community book read using the book How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. This is a weekly discussion with various leaders in the community. Last week we dealt with educators. Tonight we're dealing with law enforcement officials. And of course we have an esteemed group of panelists with us tonight. And we want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves to you, tell us a little bit about what they do, their titles, where they work, and then we'll go ahead and proceed with the conversation. Why don't we first start with Tony Thompson?
Good evening. I'm Sheriff Thompson. I'm with the Blackhawk County Sheriff's Office. I've been the sheriff now for going on 12 years. I've been with the Sheriff's Office for 26 years. I'm happy to be here.
Welcome. Brian Williams?
Thank you, Reverend. Brian Williams, Blackhawk County Attorney. Been here about 5 years, been with the office about 14.
Fabulous. Helen Hare?
I am Helen Hare. I'm the Chief of Police and Director of Public Safety at the University of Northern Iowa here in Cedar Falls. I've been here 8 years.
And Craig Bertie, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Craig Bertie. I'm the Chief of Police for the City of Cedar Falls. I've worked in Cedar Falls for 30 years through all the ranks. Just spent the last 4 years as the Assistant Chief and was recently promoted to Chief of Police.
All right, wonderful. And of course, Joe Fitzgerald was supposed to be here tonight. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it with us, but I know he's with us in spirit. Well, again, we are grateful for this particular panel discussion. It's about 30 minutes long. And if you had opportunity to see the event that happened last week, you know, we ask a question or two and pick the brains of these panelists who share great insight and expertise with us. Again, I do want to remind everyone that this particular production was brought to you by Gwen Berry and UNI. They have championed the book read, but there's a whole host of community members who are working behind the scenes. This is indeed a community collaborative as we work together to explore how to be an anti-racist with the hope that we can learn from the book discussion to actually implement policy changes here within the Cedar Valley. And on that note, we began with our first question, and I guess we'll go back into the corner with you, Sheriff Thompson. We want to ask each of you, what was an aha moment for you as you were reading through the chapters that you were assigned?
Well, first of all, I didn't just read the chapters I was assigned. I read the book. I enjoyed just the conversational nature that the way Kendi writes, right? I enjoyed that. But one of the things that he wrote that really stuck with me, and I took really good notes. I took it to heart. When he says being anti-racist isn't just about saying I like everybody, I accept everyone. I'm being all about diversity. I'm about inclusion. When I was a young deputy, that was kind of it, right? I paid attention to what Mike Kubik was doing, and it was all about can we try and become more diverse? Can we try and be more accepting? He takes it a step further, and he says, listen, it's not just about that inclusivity. It's about rooting out those actions and those jokes around the around the water cooler. It's about seeking out bigotry. It's about focusing on all of those things that foster this negativity, right? And yeah. I thought, you know, that is for me, that really was an aha moment, because it's not just good enough to put on a front. It's all about that proof of concept by taking action, right? Yeah. And I really enjoyed hearing that and giving that perspective, because he relates it to cancer. He relates it to, you know, how it portrays itself in society. And I enjoyed that.
Fabulous. I'm glad you read the book too.
Absolutely.
You read more than just your assigned chapters. That's marvelous. It's marvelous.
No, I enjoyed it. I very much did enjoy it. I like the way he writes.
Good. Fabulous. Why don't we go to County Attorney Brian Williams? Same question, sir. An aha moment for you.
And obviously, there's quite a few when you get through these chapters, and how the themes that are throughout, even though the chapters address different topics. And I think that to address Tony's point, I think one of the themes that you gather is when you say, you know, everybody's the same, we're colorblind, I think one of the things he gets to is sometimes those are the people you have to be worried about the most, right? He ends the one chapter with only racists are scared of the R word, right?
Mm.
And I think a more specific aha moment I had was he talked, I think it's the ethnicity chapter, where he talks about, he says, I'm a college professor, I'm an author, so I must be different.
Mm.
And why that struck me as, it struck me in that, and he gets to it a little bit more in chapter 8, where he talks about, I think he calls them the unexceptionals,
Mm.
but that someone who's accomplished in his shoes, when you address it like that, it minimizes his accomplishments.
Mm.
And then when he gets to chapter 8 and he talks about, you know, the guy, the black person who is, I think, a hurdler is what he says, and then the added obstacles that they have in life. I mean, that I just had never thought of it in that way before. So through all those moments, when you hit that, I thought, I never thought of it that way. Not only from the person who's not accomplished, but for someone who is. And he obviously addresses insecurity throughout the book, right? Racial insecurity that he has. That I think is part of that he's accomplished. He's worked for what he's done, but there's still this perception that has to add to that level of insecurity. So that was something that really jumped out at me.
Yeah, I think that was very interesting too, what you added there. I mean, I think the point that he was trying to make was, of course, that he was being treated differently because of his accomplishments, when in fact, everybody by virtue of color, they're stuck in the same, you know, group. But I really appreciate your observations. Thank you so much. Helen Hare, Police Chief Helen Hare.
Sure, and like everybody else, I actually read the whole book too.
Fabulous. You all are batting 1,000. That's great.
Lots of notes too. I just have a couple of things, and part of it is piggybacking a little bit on what's already been said.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that struck out the most to me was the fact everybody struggles, because he admits his own struggles. And if you can put that mirror up to yourself and be honest and say, okay, it's something that you know, everybody struggles with, even, you know, within our own race. He points out, you know, that Anglos discriminated against other whites and all, you know, different things like that, it was very telling to me that throughout the book, it's like, it's not just a us and them, it's a we.
Mm.
And I wrote down and underlined it that don't generalize. And that's what we catch ourselves doing sometimes. We do exactly what he warns us against. We take one person, one incident, and then we transpose that to an entire race or an entire culture. And that's not something that we should do.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. We'll talk about that some more. Police Chief Bertie.
Well, I have to admit, I did not read the whole book, so I just read the 4 chapters.
You're a
I
little
did
more
take
human.
notes, probably not as good of notes as Tony's, but I would agree with a lot of Brian's comments. But one thing I noticed was, that struck me, you know, at the beginning of each chapter of those 4 chapters, there was, you know, either a quote or a saying or something that was come out by a medical professional or an elected official in the early 1900s. And you would read those things and you know, be shocked by them. And right away, you know, you think, have we come a long ways, or have we really come a long ways? But it was just interesting to see those, you know, comments that were made by elected officials or what were medical professionals at the time about African Americans or about different races and things.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just piggybacking perhaps then off of something that Helen said earlier, the notion that all of us are kind of caught up with this to some degree. Do you remember reading the piece about Clinton? Bill Clinton, early 2000, came out with this great dissertation on the fact that we're 99.9% all the same. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about that. I mean, how did that move you? Do you remember the moment perhaps when you saw the announcement for yourself, and how has that affected or impacted your work since that moment? We start with you, Sheriff Thompson.
Sure. the fact that race doesn't exist biologically or behaviorally, it did make me think, how do other animals on this planet act or react if somebody looks different? If you think about like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and that's a humanistic interpretation of somebody that's different, that stands out, that looks different, that doesn't fit. I go back and I think about the social experiment that was done with youngsters in school, where blue eye, brown eye. You remember that? So it frustrates because, again, there's no genetic causal relationship between any of this. And I truly believe, and I've talked to, I had the opportunity last week, I think it was, to go over to Cedar Falls Alternative High School. And they invite me in every year, and I just get to sit down and just kind of chill out and talk to students that are at risk or at greater risk. And I said, this is stuff that's going on right now, is a much greater opportunity for me just to lay it out there and just tell me what you think. Tell me about the media. Tell me about bad cops. Tell me about all of these different things. And I think current generations are much more accepting. They're much more worldly. They're much more realizing of this biological indifference than my generation, than the generation before mine. This predication of racial injustice, I think, is getting more and more diminished, which is great if we can just force it along and push it and expedite it. And so those were the things that were kind of in the back of my mind as I'm reading him. I'm like cheerleading as we're going along, saying, how do we light a fire under this and just keep it moving and expedite it?
Well, let me just ask this question as clarification. Are you saying that you interpreted what he was saying as if he was saying racism is diminishing?
No.
Oh.
I'm saying as I read through this, and I used that one generalized statement that, that whole 99.9% biologically and the same, and I don't have biologically and behaviorally the same, that race doesn't exist.
Oh, I see.
What is pigmentation? What is that? What is the significance of that?
Absolutely. And of course, he was reinforcing what the scientists have always said to us, is that race is a social and political construction. It's not a biological one. Right. And quite frankly, the Clinton announcement confirmed what the ancient faiths have always told us, that we were pretty much all the same with one blood. But we have to deal, quite frankly, with the reality of the social and political construction, though. And that's why he writes the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Why don't we move around a little bit, though? Brian Williams, can I ask you the same question? What was your reaction to the announcement by President Clinton?
When he started, and I think the interesting thing, too, and I don't want to go off topic too much, is Mr. Kendi's like right about my age. So all the different things he talks about throughout the book, he talks about, he goes from Rodney King to O.J. Simpson to, his upbringing and some of the things that he was exposed to. I felt that just because, again, I think we're about the same age. He might be a year younger. But when he started with the Bill Clinton announcement and the 99.9, and then just the general misconception that, that 0.1% then must be race. And the first thing that hit to me, consistent with what Tony talked about a little bit, was the Brown versus Board of Education, and when they used the dolls and people's reaction to that. And then here we are sitting, we're 99.9%. And I never thought of it again in that context. And he puts that in a perfect location and a place to kind of incorporate the rest of what he's talking about.
Yeah, fabulous. Jane Elliott, by the way, she was the person responsible for that experiment right here from Iowa. So we have to celebrate her. Helen Hare, what did you think about that?
the 99.9, it was pretty eye-opening. I mean, I'm pretty sure I read and saw this stuff at the time, but to think and to have it the way he put it, I know if I'm remembering accurately, he said that there's more similarity between somebody from West Africa and somebody from Western Europe genetically than there is to somebody else in Africa. Okay. So I was like, okay, wow, that's pretty telling that if you don't believe it otherwise, I mean, it's staring right there in the face that genetically, what is 0.1% among billions of people? I mean, it's just, I think he kind of, I won't say he hit you over the head with it, but it was pretty powerful, pretty impactful to see that and to know that globally, like I said before, it's melanin. It's
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's
That's
negligible at best. Yeah. And Craig Bertie, your thoughts about that report?
Well, I would just, I remember, reading a short bit about Clinton, but I would say the same thing too, that it is that we're all the same. Everybody's the same. We're all wired the same way. And that society, casts that on to different groups. And so, agreeing with what some of the other people said. So I don't remember a lot of detail about the Clinton report or know a lot about it. I don't think I've ever seen it before, but absolutely. Just that, society gives you, stereotypes people, puts people in groups. And really that's what he talks about.
Sure. And we appreciate that. And let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, part of the reason why we're even having this book discussion is because COVID, first of all, forced us to stay home and read more. But then again, there was a public killing of George Floyd in Minnesota that really captured the imagination of a lot of people around, not only this nation, but around the world. And we're acknowledging here today that while the scientists are telling us that there's not very much difference between any of us, we realize that because of the social political construction of race, that helps offer explanation for what we call, mass destruction of Black bodies. Sometimes it's state-sanctioned destruction of Black bodies. Unfortunately, we see it a lot in law enforcement and in other aspects of law enforcement, not just a police officer on the street that we typically think of. And of course, the policies, Brian, that you work on, they help shape that. But I want you to respond to that as you think about this quote. I think I shared with you that there was something that stood out to me on page 47 in the book, where Kendi is dealing with this notion of the microaggression. The microaggression was coined by Chester Pierce in 1970. He was dealing with these abuses, but Kendi says, I detest the post-racial platform that supported the microaggression's popularity. I detest its component parts, micro and aggression. A persistent daily low hum of racist abuse is not minor. I use the term abuse because aggression is not as exacting a term. Abuse accurately describes the action and its effects on people. Distress, anger, worry, depression, anxiety, pain, fatigue, suicide. I guess as you think about those thoughts from Kendi himself, have you given much consideration to the impact that law enforcement, cumulatively speaking, has had, let's say, on Black life, here in this nation? And how do you, feel that we should move forward to help resolve the issues that have been coming up by conscientious people everywhere? Why don't we just start perhaps with you, Helen Hare, at the university there?
I think that, anytime you're subjected to something that's constant, it's never ending, it does create all of those feelings, and his descriptions are pretty accurate: distress, anger, worry, anxiety, fatigue. You just get tired, and that can just wear you down. So I can certainly see, like I said, if that's a constant force being placed on you from not just one angle, but from all different angles, that has to be debilitating.
Yeah.
It can be debilitating. And, you know, if I'm sorry, you wanted to know how it related to police interactions.
Well, sure.
I think we need to be aware of that. Obviously, that's kind of a no-brainer. That's something that we have to be aware of and respectful of in our interactions. And understanding that we may not feel it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There's a lot of negatives in there, but you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, we appreciate that insight. And I better go up to the top, Tony Thompson. He's got a heated debate coming up, so let me give him a few moments to.
Just meet the candidates. I hope it's not a debate. But,
Okay.
So I'm going to take Helen, because Helen kind of generalized, right? I'm going to take it down the road just a piece. I think as Kendi talks about microaggression, he breaks that down. I'm going to infer, I'm going to take it a step further. I'm going to say things like microaggression, things like implicit bias, they are ways or excuses. And I think this is really what he's saying. They're ways or excuses to talk around racism, to not drive right at the heart of the matter, right? Not to pick that scab and let it bleed and let it ooze. And I think he's professing that sometimes pain is necessary to allow and to cause us to start healing. We can defy all the odds. We could heal society of racism and create an anti-racist existence if we commit to it. If we don't just talk about it, or if we don't talk around it, if we don't pussyfoot around it, right? And so that's what I think, that's why he doesn't like the term microaggression. And I think that's the same as an implicit bias being just kind of this vaporous kind of notion that doesn't really get to the heart of the matter. So I'll put it there. That might be controversial. I don't know. But I as I read more into you get into chapter 4 and I think that's really what he's driving at is to try and motivate, right? Not just talk. So,
I think that's an apt description of what Kendi was getting at, Tony. I appreciate your insight and your critique about that. Yeah, he's saying that aggression was not exacting enough. It's not exacting enough. He said he'd rather call it abuse. Greg Bertie, what do you think about it all?
Well, I would say kind of back, a little back to your original question, but, with law enforcement and how we treat people. Sure. But I agree too that, really it's just repeated abuse. It's being witnessed. It's being accepted. So I wouldn't describe it as microaggression either. I would say this summer when I think all the law enforcement agencies, we had, either protests or gatherings with the Black Lives Matter movement or other things going on. I can absolutely, sympathize and empathize and relate with people as they share their experiences. I haven't been through those experiences, but, be those types of things. Those microaggressions are just things that they have put up with through the years and years and years. And then it's always building, and that would affect their view of all law enforcement. And of course, us wearing the uniform, we don't like that. We hear of like what happened in Minneapolis. We like to say, hey, well, we don't do those things. And, in fact, in the debate last night for our Vice President of the United States, I think it was the saying was bad cops are bad for good cops. And so just in, the movement and what they are saying, really, it kind of gets at this. It's just over and over the abuses and, just never ending. So.
Thank you. And of course, Brian Williams, same questions. Just looking for your reflections on all of that.
Well, so he starts the page before, so
Mhm.
and you don't know where he's going. You think he's going to start talking about kind of the ripple effect, and that's just the sheer weight of all of this that it has on the Black community. And then out of nowhere, he says, "I detest this word."
Mm.
From there, and again, to kind of couple this in with some of the requests that you had of us, which is, what made you feel uncomfortable in this book? Well, the book makes you feel uncomfortable. And I think that's his purpose, is to make you feel uncomfortable. If you read something as a white person in this and you say, if you don't feel uncomfortable, I don't think he gets his point across necessarily. So as you go throughout that, and as we discuss.
Well, let me just interject here. What is it then about the microaggression talk that made you uncomfortable?
Well, that part didn't necessarily make me uncomfortable, but when he says at the end, again, which I've already mentioned, that only racists are scared of the race talk, right? And earlier we were talking about how, again, when I started this job, you didn't talk about race, right? You said you were colorblind and everyone's treated the same.
Mm.
And if you don't do that, and as he talks about in the book, which is if you don't identify racial categories, how do you find racial inequality?
Mm.
And that has to be applied in our day-to-day job. Whereas before you put the blinders on, you said, I'm going to work. And that has been such a major shift that you have to look at that on so many different levels, particularly in our work and what we do, and our exposure to the public and the lasting effect of that exposure to the public. As we kind of tie those things in together.
Well, that's great. Well, it looks like we're coming on the end of our time. I guess we just have a few more seconds. Let me just start with this statement and then you tell me why. Why is it that everyone should read this book then? And we'll start with you, Tony. Why should everybody read this book?
So again, I kind of started in my cheerleading mode that, we can, as community members, as a community, tonight we're representing law enforcement, but I think we are more a part of that body as a whole. We can take those steps that are necessary, but it's the collective that has to work together to make that happen. So the fact that you've got people that are willing to sit down to read Kendi's book, willing to discuss it openly, like Brian says, it's only the racists that fear that word. If we can openly and transparently own the misdeeds that are being done in law enforcement today, we recognize clear back from slave patrol, Jim Crow days, all the way forward to George Floyd today. We hate owning it, but we're obligated to own it. We're obligated to own it and to expose it to the light. Whether it's implicit bias, microaggression, whatever it is, we expose it to the light. We exercise that demon wherever it is at. We address it straight up and right up front. And I think all of that helps. All of that heals, even when it hurts.
Wonderful. I have a few seconds left here. Craig Bertie, same question. Why should everyone read this book?
Well, I think everybody should read it just because another person's point of view, see how you feel about that point of view, and find out if it does make you feel uncomfortable.
Mm. We appreciate everybody's comments, by the way. Helen Hare, why should everybody read this book?
I'm going to echo what Craig said. I think education is the only way to combat ignorance. And you should at least, whether you think you agree with a book or not, read it and then draw your conclusion. And if you still don't agree, at least maybe you understand a little bit better.
Mm. And Brian Williams, we give you the last word tonight.
I think the title says it all. Particularly in light of what Tony said, which is, I think there's a lot of folks who say we don't live in Jim Crow anymore, and look at the advances that we've made. We don't need to strive any further. And what this book does is it tells you, it doesn't tell you, it tells you how to truly, it lines out each and everything in every level, how to be anti, not just, as I indicated, colorblind, fair-minded. It takes you that step above and beyond.
Wow. Well, we really appreciate everyone for your time and for your expertise. We know you don't have to be here, but you chose to be here, and we really appreciate it. And for those of you who are in your book reads, we hope that you have a very spirited discussion and can use some of the insights that these professionals have provided for you tonight. Enjoy your book read, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend.